Content warning, sensual accessories.
Hello, this is David Halen. You are now listening to the introduction of my story, Perfect Forgetfulness. I hope you enjoy. Gaze? Raisa asked me with a disappointed sigh. I looked over at where she sat on the other side of the bed, sitting in a way where she was facing away from me. Yes, love? Raisa looked over her shoulder at me, her longer hair catching on her shoulder as her face was turned towards me. She sighed again. Am I? I could feel my heart sink an inch when she said that. Are you what? I asked, but I already knew the answer. Her eyes went down to the middle of the bed. She put her hand on her other elbow. Am I truly your love? She asked me softly and with trepidation. I put my book on my chest and directed my attention to Raisa, my wife. I sighed. It doesn't feel like it, I croaked. I guess it's habit, I added sadly. Raisa turned so she was sitting crisscross. She had her hand lingering on her chest and making her nightgown crease and ripple over the front of her upper body. Is that what we've turned into? She asked. She sounded like she wasn't only condemning me, but also herself. Are we habits to each other, Gaze? I shook my head. I put a bookmark in my book and sat up straighter so I could look at my wife in the eyes at the level she was at. I couldn't make words so easily. I let out another longer sigh and slowly, subtly nodded. Raisa looked off at one of the walls behind her. I could hear her sniffle. In the quiet room, it was as loud as glass breaking on a blackboard. I thought about what to say. Are you okay is too rudimentary of a question, and it's obvious that she wasn't. Neither of us were. Do you want to drink wine and bane is too juvenile of a question coming from a man in his 30s. Do you want to go for a walk might be a good proposal. It would be the last good proposal I would have given in a few years, so it feels like. I started to ask. Raisa looked at me through the mirror over our dresser. I could see her eyes through the lamplight from the dresser. I looked to Raisa in the eyes. Do you want to get dressed and go for a walk? I asked her. Raisa shook her head. It's 3 a.m, Gaze, she explained. I looked at the clock on my nightstand for confirmation. 3:02 in the morning. And Raisa yawned. Damn. There was a time where I found every quirk, every tick, every minute action from her beautiful. But now, I have the fondness of an old man coming across a cemetery. And we've hardly slept. I shook my head, my eyes still fixed on Raisa's eyes through the mirror. Yes or no, love? Both of us reacted in disappointment when I called her that again. Raisa shook her head. There was a glistening spot on her cheek. She stood up from the bed, turned off the lamp, and walked over to her side of the bed to my left and laid on top of the covers. She rested her head on her pillow and laid on her left side facing away from me. She didn't fall asleep. I could tell from the way she was breathing that she wasn't asleep. I let out a sigh. There's a pain in my heart. This is what we've become. Are we tired of each other? Have we gotten too used to each other? Did we go too fast? I don't know. I turned to my right and turned off my lamp, and the darkness rushed into the space the light vacated from. I laid on my back, looking up into the darkness. Why are we like this now? I said under my breath. I don't like it either, Raisa said quietly. Can we discuss this in the morning? I nodded, knowing full well that she couldn't see me. Yes. There was a silence between us for a few seconds that seemed to drag a little while longer than what was normally comfortable. Okay. I couldn't fall asleep. Raisa was able to sleep fast enough after we stopped talking that morning. But I was laying there with my eyes shut, waiting to drift off. What are we doing? What made us look at each other like this? I don't despise her, but I don't adore her either. And it hurts. It's like we're just in each other's lives because we found each other here. We loved each other at first sight, but then what happened? How did we get to the way we are now? I sighed as I laid awake. What are we doing? Now I'm back to where I started. I shook my head slowly. I looked over at the clock on my bed, and it read 4 a.m. Had I been thinking about us the whole time, and it's only been an hour? I could feel my eyes start to moisten with tears. I was thinking in circles as I was denied sleep by my thinking. Everything coming back to where I began. I reluctantly got out of bed at 6 to make breakfast for Raisa and I. Routine. I brewed coffee for myself and tea for her. Routine. Raisa came out into the kitchen. "Good morning," she said to me with a tired tone in her voice. Routine. "Good morning," I answered back with no different tone of my own. "Did you sleep at all last night?" I asked her. She shook her head. "You didn't either?" I shook my head. Routine. She didn't look at me as she was gathering words to say. "Let's talk about us after we eat." I nodded and continued to make breakfast for us. Scrambled eggs and toast. Routine. But somewhat of a new routine. Raisa grabbed her tea from the counter and sat at the table where her tablet was and began to read. I don't know what she reads. The news, a novel, some other article. Routine. The eggs and toast were finished, and I put everything on our plates and took them to the table where she was sitting. Routine. Raisa continued to read on her tablet as she ate her breakfast, and I looked out the window as I ate mine. Routine. The weather forecaster said it was supposed to rain this afternoon, but nothing too serious. No flooding. That's good. Raisa and I hardly looked at each other, besides a few subtle, empty glances at each other. New routine. Raisa always finished eating first, and I finished eating a few minutes after she was finished. Routine. I took our plates and she put her tablet away and waited for me to sit back down. Scarce routine. We looked at each other. She had a tired look in her eyes. Some from last night, some from the years of routine. Raisa sighed. "I miss us," she said weakly. "But I think both of us have been saying that bi-weekly." I nodded. "What have we tried?" she asked in solemn despair. "Why didn't this work?" I shrugged my shoulders. Routine. She shook her head. Her words were breaking like our hearts. "We tried being foolish and act young again. Be intimate and sensual with each other." Her words broke again. "But," she let out an almost gravel-like sigh, "that was like drying yourself off with a wet towel." I nodded. Routine. She started to say. "I don't know what happened to us, Case." She was stiff. I was stiff in a relaxed position on my chair. "I missed the young us." I let out a tired sigh. Routine. Raisa nodded. I think..." She shook her head. "What can we do? Do we want to go through the MBD process again?" I shrugged. "We've gone through it twice before." My voice felt dragged across a rough stone ground. 2 different times before. That means we had come to a point where we had no other option but to go through the process 2 different times. Raisa nodded. Nothing else has worked yet, she said, defeated. Routine? I nodded. Routine. They say that no one should go through the process more than 5 times. And we're at 2 now, she explained, but we both already knew this. She was debating about herself of the idea. Is it cost-effective to go through this again? The process is free by itself for legal reasons, but that doesn't mean there's a possibility that you might pay for something down the road. Have we already paid something because of how we've ended up? I don't know. Routine. Maybe routine? I sat up straighter and looked into my wife's tired eyes. If we have nowhere else to turn by the end of the day, my voice spoke like I was in mourning. Then we will go into mourning, I explained to her. Raisa forced a smile for a half second before her tired, resting face returned to her expression. Okay. Her voice almost croaked as she said that. Let's go over to your brother's house this afternoon so we can fill out our journal, I proposed. Maybe this proposal is better than the one from earlier this morning. In case we decide to go through the process again. Raisa nodded. I feel sorry for him, she said flatly. I tilted my head at that. She glanced up at me and looked back down into a frown. Porter has seen our lives change from the process 2 times before. I continued to look at her. And she looked up and straightened herself to where we were eye to eye. You know we talk to each other often, she said. I nodded. She let out a half laugh. Hell, I talk to Porter more than my own husband. I let out a different, soft, weak groan on hearing that. Raisa nodded in a strange rhythm. He's seen our lives change over time. First a few years into our marriage, then snap back before we've somehow changed again in 4 months, and now... Her voice felt deeper. It's been only 2 weeks since the last process we went through to try to save our marriage. She took in a deeper breath that seemed to shake as it was coming in. We swore him to secrecy against us, so nothing would be tainted in our resets, she explained. But I knew. Routine. But before we go again, I want to ask him, where did we go wrong? I nodded. As long as you do the talking, I told her with a soft growl to my voice. Raisa nodded. I stood up and walked back to our living room. I let myself fall onto my couch, and I was asleep instantly. Routine. I don't know when I stopped dreaming. Maybe it was at a time when I found myself to not be ambitious anymore. When was that? I don't know. The last time I remembered having a dream was in my early 20s. Raisa and I were dating, and every night I dreamed that we would spend the rest of our lives together. I wish I was living that dream, and I think she wishes that too. I woke up from my nocturnal nap and looked up at the clock on the wall. Almost 10 in the morning. I sat up and rubbed my eyes to get whatever amount of sleep out of my eyes. I walked over to the other sitting room and saw Raisa writing out what she wanted to put in the journal. She was sitting in the darker half of the sitting room as the overcast sky slowly drained its precipitation payload outside. But the pad she was writing on illuminated her face. That may have been the first time in a long time that her face glowed like that, and it was assisted this time. I think I had better plan out what I wanted to write as well. I went over to the end table and got my tablet, and its display began to glow in my hand. We have these journal entries so that if, God forbid, we go through the MBD process a fifth time, we'll translate the journal entries from whatever language we translated them into, and, as a last effort to save our marriage, read the lessons we've learned from our past processes, and avoid the detriments that we fell into before. It's not flawless, but we're working with what we have provided. I went to another part of the house and sat down on the floor. In front of me was the living room, and to my left was a hallway. I felt comfortable sitting here. I don't know why. I don't think it's routine. I looked at the glowing tablet in my hands. The different applications on display in neat rows stared at me with no judgment. I swiped through a few pages before I got to the note page of the tablet. I guess I didn't think I would be using that program as often, so I put it at the end of all of the pages of other apps and programs. So many useless programs that I can't get rid of. The system won't let me do so. I opened up the note application and took out the pen provided with the tablet, and I began to write. March 24th, 2043. It has been only 2 weeks since Raisa and I went through the process. A shorter section of time than the attempt before. I think we placed the day we wanted to set our minds to on a bad day. Not because we were miserable, but because we only had pleasure on our minds. I want to look back at the days following our wedding a few years ago and try to figure out what day is a better day for us to be set to. This time around was bad for us because for a week and a half we pursued pleasure between each other, night after night. I believe we burned each other out. The only thing on our minds was the idea of what we could do in bed. And in the fallout of this, we have learned that this is not what we need to dwell on for now. We have broken gazes as we look at each other. We can look at each other in the eyes, but we feel incomplete because we aren't completing each other the way we are needing to. I miss the time when Raisa and I loved each other, not out of routine, but out of devotion. There's a myriad of lessons that I've learned from this that I know I'll forget through the process. First, love and lust are not the same thing. I lost the meaning of love the past few weeks, but I have full knowledge of this. Lust is never satisfied, and in the process of feeding lust, I have found myself dry and tired, looking for more venues to indulge myself. It's a useless pastime that takes more than it leaves behind. Raisa and I write short notes for each other that we put in our pockets before we go through the process. And the note that I'll put in each of ours will tell us that lust cannot take the place of love. Maybe I'll add that we should enjoy the company of each other more than the feeling of each other. I don't know if that means anything, but I feel like it would be a step towards keeping our marriage alive longer. Porter, if you read any of these, I want you to break your rule if we go past a certain exception. If Raisa is talking to you about us only going after the pleasure of each other, stop us and give us the sense we don't have. Thank you. I looked over past the living room and Raisa was reading again. She must have finished what she wanted to write and translated the text into a different language. I stood up with enough trouble for it to be noticeable, but I made it to my feet soon enough. She looked up and we both nodded in agreement. Would you text your brother and tell him we're on our way? I asked Raisa, my voice still seeming to drag. She nodded, and took her phone out to send the text. Porter lived about half an hour away from us, in the middle of the more rural part of the country. It's a longer drive for us to take, so in turn we do our best to make the most of each trip out there we take. Porter is a wonderful man and should get married. He would be a blessing to any woman. On the drive to Porter's, I neglected to think. My mind was blank from the beginning of the drive until we reached Porter's. I simply believed that I had nothing to think about on the long drive. I looked out the window and enjoyed the scenery, a small thing that I found myself to enjoy now. We were halfway to Porter's when I remembered that I hadn't changed the language of what I had written. Which language should I do this time? I think I had my entries be translated to Spanish and Latin. So German this time. I took my tablet out of the slot in the door and went to the note application and selected the option to translate the entire note to German. I looked the note over. I don't speak a word of German. It's perfect. By the time we reached Porter's house, it was almost 1 p.m. I guess I spent a lot of time considering what I wanted to write. Porter was sitting on the porch on a bench reading a book. He had the book in his hands and rested his hands on his dog's head. The dog looked very content with where he was. Porter looked up from his book, and a weak smile grew on his face amongst the new forming wrinkles fractaling from his eyes and cheekbones. The weak smile took a passive position on his face as his hazel eyes looked us over. You couldn't find another way? Porter asked us in a way that seemed like he already knew the answer. Raisa went ahead of me. She shook her head. No. The brother and sister hugged. Porter was 8 years older than Raisa, and it was obvious to see. Well, Porter began to say. His voice wasn't so deep that it dragged like mine, but it was deep enough to where if you pressed against his chest, you would feel a gentle rumbling with every word. Let me get your journal out, he said before inviting us inside. Come in. Raisa and Porter walked inside with their arms over each other's shoulders, and the husky, Brandon, followed close to Porter's side. You know, I wish you two would visit every other day, Porter said as he left Raisa and I in the living room as he went down into the hall to get our journal. Maybe me talking to both of you at once would keep your marriage going. Porter opened a door in a farther part of the small house, and we could hear the soft thumping of books and other things being moved as he was getting our journal. Maybe he was saying something burlesque under his breath, but we couldn't hear it. Porter came out of the hallway with our journal. It wasn't anything extravagant or remotely poor. It was simply a journal that we bought at a hobby store a 1.5 years ago. Porter gave Raisa the journal, and she produced her tablet from her purse. It escapes me, Porter said with a mix of amazement and disappointment in his voice. That you two managed to erode your marriage away again. And this time, it was because you two wouldn't stop. Raisa blushed, and that was cue enough for Porter to stop. He sighed. Raisa opened the journal to the next empty page and put it on an end table. She went to the Notes app on her tablet and projected the text she wrote onto the journal, lining up the words to fit on the page before pressing confirm, pasting the text onto the journal. She didn't write too much, nor too little, but I wrote more than she did. I had my tablet in hand and turned the page in the journal to the next empty page. I did the same actions with the tablet that Raisa had done and pasted my German letter onto the journal's paper. I could feel an anticipation within myself of something. I wanted to place the feeling or where it was coming from, but I felt like I was being stopped from exploring the idea. How soon are you two going to do it? Porter asked as he took the journal from the table and looked over Raisa and I's notes. Porter could read the translated notes as well as Raisa and I, and that was the main idea of this, that this be a last resort, just in case all else fails. I nodded. Yes, Raisa answered her brother. You two seem so drawn to it. It sounded like Porter's words were being dragged out, but that could easily be my fatigue getting in the way of my perceptions. Almost like the process is some miracle drug that can fix anything. My perception of his words again. Or, you think it does. Porter was looking through the new notes. He was taking in every word like he was reading it normally, but we all knew that he couldn't. Porter turned the page to what I wrote, and he didn't say anything as he looked at my page. After a minute or two, he looked up at me and closed the journal. Interesting. Porter put the book under his arm and looked at the two of us, and took a longer breath before speaking. I hope you two get what you're looking for, and Porter looked down at Brandon and rubbed his ears, and then looked back up at us. And I hope you never have to find it again. I nodded. We hope so too, Raisa said, with a small spark of hope in her voice. Porter turned around and walked back down the hall with Brandon at his heel. Porter took a glance over his shoulder, and the look in his eyes echoed everything he hoped for us. Porter walked the rest of the way down the hall, and Raisa and I went out of the house and into our car. The drive back went faster than the drive there, but this time Porter's words echoed in my head. I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope you never have to find it again. I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope you never have to find it again. Over and over it echoed. I guess it's a rally cry of sorts. If an entire city were chanting this single phrase to some corrupt politician, it wouldn't make too much sense. But it makes sense to Raisa and I. I looked over at Raisa, driving, and her brother's words echoed again. I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope you never have to find it again. I sighed. I hope so as well. We didn't go home before going to the MBD Center. The people who started the MBD program suggest that you don't have too much in your stomach before going through the process, due to complications when you re-emerge into your old self. That's a strange way to say it, but it feels close enough to what the process does. After we reached the main city proper, we went to the MBD center that's closest to our house. Raisa put the car in the parking lot and turned on the valet option to send the car back to our house. We walked in. The display above the reception desk said there were 12 terminals available. It's good to see that most people in this area were having good lives at the least. Raisa and I went up to the reception desk, and the younger lady asked us the questions we have heard before. Is this the first time you're going through the mind and body displacement process? She asked with a routine sound in her voice. No, Raisa answered. How many times have you gone through the process before? Twice. The receptionist's eyes widened a fraction at the sound of that, but her voice sounded unfazed. How old are the parties in question? Raisa gestured towards me. 31 and 27. The receptionist nodded almost sagely. It's a rainy day outside with a chance of lightning. Do you recognize the fact that should lightning be present as you are in the process, there may be terminal damage to your psychology? Raisa and I looked at each other, but we have already made the choice. Yes. Do you still intend to go through the MBD process today? Yes. Do either of you have any medical history concerning mental health at any point in your lives? No. The receptionist typed on her keyboard a few more seconds before she moved backwards in her chair to catch our ticket as it printed. She then rolled her chair back to her desk and wrote her signature on it before giving the ticket to us. Would each of you sign on either line provided on the ticket, and you will go to the terminal indicated on the tickets, and the terminal administrator at that station will give you further instructions. I took the pen that was on our raised part of the desk and signed my name on one of the lines. I then gave the pen to Raisa, and she signed on the second line. We walked into the hall, if you could call it a hall. It was more of a corridor with high ceilings, with cold lit chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, providing half of the light in the hall. The rest of the light was being illuminated by the active terminals spinning and glowing as the gyros and rings moved smoothly in circuits and rotations and motions, as if they were leaves on the surface of a pond. The terminals glowed a white light that seemed to have some other color glowing from within, but I can't seem to place what the color was. I see it as some kind of brown or an ugly blue, but Raisa says it's red. I don't think I can see that color. Each terminal was about 25 feet across, from one end of each sphere to the other, made up of gray and silver rings arranged in a way that resembled a mechanical eyeball. Each terminal was separated from the ball by a gate, and to the left of each gate was a booth where the terminal administrators stood waiting for people with tickets to come in, or they were monitoring the process of their terminals while someone or a group of people were inside the terminal. Our ticket read that we were to go to terminal number 8, and that one was on our left, closer to the end of the hall. We walked down the hall to the terminal and met the administrator running terminal number 8, who was an older-looking man wearing a steel blue 3-piece suit. The jacket of the suit looked like it had scales like a snake as the texture of the suit. The man wore small, circle-framed glasses and had white hair that was cut like he was in the military, but his posture expressed anything but military. The terminal administrator greeted us with an almost polite, warm smile. "Good afternoon," he said with a natural calmness in his voice. "Ticket, please," he requested from us. We gave the man our ticket, and he put it into his slot in his little booth, and we could hear a soft-sounding tone ping from behind the booth. "Thank you," the terminal administrator said as the gate opened, allowing us to walk the short bridge that led us to the terminal. "Please follow the instructions and answer the questions the terminal asks, and the process will begin shortly." The terminal administrator's voice sounded like a voice that had more than decades' worth of public speaking experience. His voice was settled and smooth when he spoke to us. Raisa and I walked into the open pupil-looking part of the terminal. When we were completely inside, the terminal irises moved in a fashion where we were completely enclosed within the terminal. "Please close your eyes," the automated voice from the terminal commanded. Raisa and I looked at each other. We had talked about this the past few days, if we would go through the process again, where we would want to come out, and what time we wanted our minds to be reset to. Raisa and I each reached out a hand to each other and weaved our fingers together. It's strange how pure that action felt. I closed my eyes. "We will be using a brain-wave sonar system designed to recognize images, desires, and feelings to accomplish the following needed queries," the automated voice said. "Please turn your head to the right if you understand." I turned my head to my right. "Will the two of you be taken to the same location? Please turn your heads upwards if so, or turn your heads downwards if this is not so." I turned my head upwards. "Both parties will be taken to the same location. To confirm, please open your mouth." I opened my mouth. "Confirmed," the voice said. "Will both parties be reset to the same mindset? If yes, turn your heads to the right. If no, turn your heads to the left." I turned my head to the right. "Both parties will be reset to the same mindset. To confirm, please open your mouth." I opened my mouth. "Confirmed," the voice said. Please imagine the date of which we should reset your mindset to. Please think in terms of the date first, and then the moment, the voice instructed. When decided, please turn your heads upwards. And remember, because of your prior agreements, you must choose the same date and moment. Raisa and I had set aside dates for us to reset to, in case we needed to reset multiple times. And this time we had decided to reset to June 10th, 2040, 9 in the morning. This was a week before my sister, Facility, was killed. We had practiced imagining the day vividly and clearly. We learned how to focus on the time so perfectly, specifically for the process. I turned my head upwards. A few seconds later, an image was broadcast into my mind, just outside our house in the morning time. Is this the appropriate time and place? The voice asked. If yes, open your mouth to confirm. I opened my mouth. Confirmed, the automated voice stated. The memory and body displacement process will now begin. I could feel the air move when the rings and gyros of the terminals moved and spun around us as we stood inside. I didn't dare open my eyes as the space surrounding us was flooded with a bright, blazing light. A color that I couldn't place, but I kept my eyes twisted shut. Even then, the light surrounding us was blinding. I could see the front of our house, Raisa and I's house. I felt a warm feeling in my heart when I turned my head to look at my wife, or the silhouette of her, because of the blinding light that still was surrounding us. Even the shadow of my beautiful, sweet wife made me happy, and in a few more seconds the wind will die down and we could open our eyes again, and I would be able to see her darling, smiling face. The wind circling us grew stronger and stronger, and the environment of the front of the house became more and more clear as it came to morning time. The clouds moved like white birds in flocks before the crack of dawn, as time was rolling forwards to take us to our destination. I squeezed Raisa's hand, and she squeezed back. I smiled as the gesture warmed my heart. The wind stopped, and I opened my eyes. The suburban scape was so crystal clear, and Raisa was just as beautiful and stunning as ever. I looked into her hazel eyes. I love you, my darling Rose. I told her with every passion within me blazing with fire. I kissed her on the forehead before we walked the pathway to our house. You are now listening to part beta of Perfect Forgetfulness, written by David Halen. Enjoy. The memory and body displacement process is a selective amnesia procedure followed by a distortion of space to deliver you to your desired location at the time of day you wish to arrive. There are 3 procedures for the selective amnesia portion of the process to be executed, and are dependent on the time displacement of the present and the date of which you wish to have your mind set to. If the time displacement is less than 7 days, but more than 2, then the process will target the chemical reactions and connections in your brain and will emit knowledge of the emotions the subject felt whilst the events of those 2 to 7 days or less took place. Those events are then filtered through the last emotion that the subject felt before the decided day the subject was reset to. This results in what is known as the nihilism mistake phenomenon. In psychological studies related to the memory and body displacement process, in 14 out of 91 cases in a specific sample size. This process for the short-term reset has been reported to have more flaws than that of the long-term process. The short-term process has been known to cause subjects to feel sad when they think about something commonly thought of as happy. For example, getting married, buying a new car, etc. And likewise to the converse, feeling happy about something commonly thought of as unhappy. On any place on that spectrum, for example, a loved one dying, the subject losing his or her house to the bank, betrayal, etc. This is a common side effect of the short-term MBD process, and is understood by those who undergo the process. The second procedure regarding the MBD process is any time between 1 and 2 days. In this procedure, the process will do a total mind erase up until the moment the subject wishes to be reset to, and presenting the emotion that the subject was last experiencing as they re-entered the world. The third and final procedure for the MBD process is the long-term procedure. The long-term procedure is classified as any amount of time longer than 7 days. The way the long-term procedure is conducted is dependent on each individual subject that undergoes the MBD process. The process first scans and reads the brain and creates a timeline graph of the collective positive and negative emotions relating to the experiences that the subject has lived through from the desired reset time to the present. This timeline has a positive plane and a negative plane, like that of a seismogram. Happiness, joy, euphoria, etc. are on the positive side of the graph. Sadness, antipathy, disappointment, etc. are on the negative side of the graph. The zero line dividing positive and negative is known as the placid line. If the emotional response to an event has an absolute value of 10, for example, the memory is already static and will likely fade from memory with no intervention. The experience at an absolute value of 30 is more noticeable and might result in vague memory of the event. An experience at an absolute value of at least 50 is a notable memory, and can have the most effective dominant memories in the subject's mind. On average, according to an anonymous collection of qualitative data, most experience that average at 50 in the general tested populace include being rear-ended by another car, coming of age, holding the hand of someone you love for the first time, starting your first job, and other experiences such as these. The scale for how much of an emotional impact a memory can have on an individual has no defined peak, but notable outliers include a subject experiencing gang rape for the first time, this experience resulting in an absolute value of 562, giving birth to a child after multiple failures, this experience resulting in an absolute value of 637. The long-term procedure for the MBD process takes a measurement of the two tallest peaks in a subject's memory, for example, a positive 400 and a negative 200. These peaks will then be reduced by 75%, reducing the positive 400 to a positive 100, and the negative 200 to a negative 50. Next, the memories that used to be peaked are then converted into a different tone of knowledge, whatever the subject identifies as dismissible accounts. This can be on the same level of reading a magazine article, gossip one would hear on their commute to work, etc. It gives the pretense of the notion that the peaks may have been important to someone else, but they were never important to the subject to begin with. Finally, the resulting memories will then undergo a scrambling program, making the remaining smaller experiences as tangible as dreams or fantasies. There are precautions that subjects must take that are not able to be perceived by the MBD process. There is an inconsistency with results concerning the matter of what is being labeled as advanced mental displacement There are 3 degrees of AMD that one may be subject to if they exceed the suggested 4 to 5 process limit. It is impossible to know the process limit of an individual. While one is fine after the 4th process, another experiences any degree of AMD. One instance of possible AMD one might be subject to results in total amnesia and 33% chance of aphasia. This is known as the Babylon degree of AMD. The second instance of possible AMD one might be subject to results in sudden mental overstimulation. Instead of the process performing the desired results in tampering with the subject's memories, it is possible that all the memories once tampered with before through the processes will return in an overwhelming flood of information that can have varying expected degrees of fallout. Anxiety, depression, dissociation, etc. This is known as the Alexandria degree of AMD. The final degree of AMD one may be subject to results in a total isolation and extreme exponential amplification. All of a subject's memories, both in the placid range and beyond, are displaced and amplified to unprecedented extremes. Mundane and normally forgotten memories are amplified to absolute values exceeding 1,500 in mild cases and 20,000 in extreme cases. All other peaks will be lost in the exponential amplification of every experience and memory within the subject's head. The brain will replay a year of emotions over the course of an hour. Then the next hour, another year of emotions will replay as an accessory to the first year of emotions being replayed. Then the next hour, 2 more years will be replayed at the same time within the hour. Then 8 at once, then 16. And will keep on going until every experience and emotion of the subject's life is replaying over the course of an hour in addition to the present. After this first apex hour, the slope of the intensity of the emotions will continue to escalate exponentially. If the first apex reached 3,000, the next hour climbs to 6,000. Then the next hour would climb to 12,000. Normally, no human experiences emotions at a peak this great. The possible candidates that have undergone the NBD process, that have come close to these numbers, experienced pressured suicide and reached 1,700. The other account was when the subject was cornered in war and reached 2,100. The average consistent peak absolute value of an emotional peak is up to 30,000, as long as the peak lasts less than 3 seconds. Any longer, and side effects of stress and other emotional overloads will occur. The highest absolute value average for a prolonged stimulant, such as this, will have the reading up to 1,500. This last AMD degree is the Atlantis degree of AMD. It's presently unclear as to what causes these AMD backfires, or what constitutes for some subjects having an MBD limit of 4 and others of 5. The body displacement procedure in the MBD process is similar to that of any other form of instant matter transportation. Please keep in mind that results may vary from subject to subject, and this information was collected from a sample-sized population. Thank you for turn off, I commanded the television. Raisa had fallen asleep about half an hour ago in my arms as we sat on our bed, spending the night together in each other's holds. Raisa isn't the smallest woman in the world. She certainly isn't the biggest. Raisa falls into the kind of small where she's short, but has the weight of a moderate-sized woman. I love her. I love all of her subtle curves and smooth features, her slightly taller smile than mine, framed by her perfectly indented dimples that my thumb can comfortably rest into as I gently hold her cheek and kiss my beautiful wife on the lips, and her brown hair is smooth and straight like caramel falling off a fork. My wife is beautiful, and sweet, and kind, and we treasure each other. Lights off. I told the room, and in seconds the lights faded away, leaving myself and my sleeping Raisa in the dark. The dark was a comfort to me as I held sleeping Raisa in my arms. I tried to reposition myself without waking up my wife, but she woke up anyways. I laid myself on my back on the bed, and Raisa laid on her side facing me. It was almost 11 at night when I finally dozed off. In the past few months, Raisa and I found a job where we could work together and have the weekends off. We're working at the J.L. Clementine Museum of Modern History as reception desk workers Monday through Wednesday, and we give tours of the museum on Thursday and Friday. It's a ton of fun to give the tours and talk about what has happened over the past 50 years, from a businessman becoming president of the formerly known United States of America for 8 years, for everything he worked for to be literally ripped apart 12 years later, when one of America's presidents that was too popular for their own good made terrible choices for the country. And that was amplified when the sundering earthquake split North America into two new continents, Appalachia and Sierra, though neither region reflects the name of either continent entirely. And they're still recognizable and dignified enough reference points for either continent. Raisa and I would talk at great length about everything the museum holds as far as information and historical accounts, and how much of the smaller details had sprouted from social media platforms that have ceased to exist due to mutiny within the divided US. But of course, the devastation of Facebook, Twitter, and Holler platforms didn't happen right away, and both Raisa and I were too young at the time to accurately say anything about how soon or late this mutiny in history was for it to have changed anything. If the devastations happened earlier, what would have changed? If later, would the Americas be totally obliterated beyond repair? Interesting downtime talk between Raisa, other coworkers, and I. One topic that continues to be interesting to talk about isn't something that we have on display at the museum. The ongoing conflict of World War III and how it hasn't even ended. The reason that ideas or information getting into the details of World War III aren't found in the museum because there's a set of guidelines that the museum has to be set up to code to. There are 3 specific rules that the museums need to adhere to. First being that we cannot have exhibits or placards or any piece that suggests that religion is to blame for anything in history. All conflicts have nothing to do with the following: money or the central bank. And we cannot have any information that only has credibility through third-party research facilities. In the break room, there are 3 or 4 different televisions that are always on different news channels talking about things going on locally, nationally, and internationally. And often a topic of conversation is surprisingly not the local news, but everything but what's going on local. It's funny to all of us that international news talks about either side of the sundered America, like they're a celebrity couple having a bad breakup, but are no longer concerned with each other. And when the celebrities are in the same restaurant with each other, and there's an awkward tone to the whole situation as they avoid eye contact, that's how the 2 parts of America are today. Raisa and I were in the kitchen eating breakfast one morning, almost a year since we did the MBD process last. "Are we finally where we want to be?" Raisa asked with an excitement in her voice. I nodded as I put my coffee back on my table. "I would think so." I could feel a smile through my words, and I didn't bother hiding it. Raisa smiled a giddy smile, and I let my own smile beam through with no hesitation. "How long has it been?" My wife asked me with an adorable childlike curiosity in her late 20s self. "We waited so long for us to be just right." I shook my head without losing any of the up-tempo emotion flowing from my heart. "I think it's been long enough, honey." There was a short, cheerful gasp of laughter that escaped my mouth. Raisa smiled her radiant smile. "After work, then?" There was a playful look in her eyes as she angled her head a fraction in a perky kind of way. I nodded. "If you want to, sure," I said to Raisa. Raisa made a noise almost like giggling. too juvenile to come from anyone her age, but I suppose this excitement can't be seriously expressed in the sophistication of an adult. As I think about these next steps in our lives, going from a family of 2 to a family of 3, all of the trepidation about the world seems to amplify, but with the reoccurring promise that I keep on telling Reza, we'll make sure our child is safe from the world. There is a trick that Reza and I learned to make time go faster. If you decide not to wait, but let time move on, time goes so much faster if you're not constantly anticipating what you're waiting for. Sure, at the ages we're at now, time might already go so fast, but with this it feels like we blink an entire month or year has passed. And it happened that fast. It didn't even feel like I took a breath, and I was already in the passenger seat of the car while Reza was driving us home. The excitement of having a child was overflowing from my heart, and I couldn't keep it together. Reza and I had gone through the MBD process 3 times before because we knew that the way we were thinking before was no good thinking for having a child. Is it going to be a boy or a girl? What will we name him or her? I'm thinking too fast. We'll get there when we get there. Keep track of today for now. We got home almost as fast as my heart could beat a few times. Reza and I went to our house and took off our coats in the mud area of the house and left our shoes at the front door. Reza and I weaved our fingers together and walked to the back of the house where our bedroom was. A more special kind of energy was intermingling between the two of us, and it grew and grew as seconds flew by. We reached our bedroom and threw our clothes to the floor. Reza, my beautiful Rose, my gorgeous wife, is a perfect carrier for our child in every way. We've seen each other bare before, even after the MBD processes, but never with this exciting energy darting back and forth between us and amplifying every pounding heartbeat, amplifying the loving, boisterous look in our eyes. You're stunning, I told my beautiful Rose. Reza beamed and leisurely folded her hands behind her back. You're a sight yourself, she said with a smile. There was a silly emotion within my heart. I feel like I've had dreams about this before, I told her. Reza looked into my eyes with a sweet emotion that was marbled with playfulness. I think I've had dreams about this too. We both smiled. We pulled each other close into a warm embrace and kissed. We dug deep into the kiss as we tackled each other onto the bed like 2 adult lions in the hot sun. There was a different feeling with this joy that made circuits between Reza and I. It wasn't familiar, at least concerning this reset, but it didn't feel like it should be foreign, but not so common that we live by the highs of this passionate joy racing between us. I enjoyed my Rose, and she enjoyed her man. The feeling of both of us interwoven through the ins and outs of our flesh. I could feel my heartbeat as it drummed in a static rhythm against Reza's chest. It came to evening, but hours before we just laid next to each other on our bed, feeling the chilled air conditioning brush goose pimples over our stomachs and limbs. As the sky darkened, I started to sit up and hold Reza's body in embrace, a hug from behind. I know Reza could feel the pressure at her lower back, but she didn't care. My stunning Rose was being held by her man, and this moment was all she cared about. Reza laughed. I laughed. Are you hungry? Reza turned her head to face me, our faces centimeters away from each other. I grinned. Yeah. Reza's smile glowed in the nighttime blue hour as the fading light outside was being overwhelmed by the lights inside. Reza got off the bed and put on one of my pullover hoodies that was far too big for her, but it covered her up for some mild decency, but not that we were worried about that. I pulled on some sweatpants that I guess could have been worn with the hoodie if Reza wasn't wearing it. We went to our kitchen and Reza reached up to get some of the garlic bread from the cupboard. When she raised her arms, she allowed herself to be upskirted. Raisa took out a few pieces of garlic bread, one for herself and one for me. We touched the pieces of garlic bread together like we would toast wine glasses. "To our future," Raisa said as we touched bread. "To the future," I said in agreement. We toasted. We went to sleep as eager and excited as children the night before their birthdays. The next few weeks seemed to go as fast as snails racing through molasses. Every other day, Raisa would check to see if she was pregnant. The first week, nothing. The second week, nothing. Later that month, we tried again. I couldn't help but let the memories from the first time echo in imagery in my head as we went to each other passionately again that night. The first week, nothing. The following, nothing. The museum offered health insurance on top of our salary. We used it for the first time that one Thursday at the end of the month. Dr. Copper told us that the lab results will be ready in a few days, and it will be called to hear the results. Raisa and I were in a strange anticipation. Time seemed to go static like lost reception, and the nights were the few short moments that signal returned. As we walked through the halls of the tower the doctor's office was at, it felt like we were walking through tar, and the walls were scraping at our sides, making our trepidation bleed through our pores, and the floor sunk its sheer rebar into our heels. We waited in a stiff patience for our name to be called. "Salem?" A nurse called our last name, and we stood up to follow the nurse to one of the rooms where we awaited even longer. There have been many feelings that have welled up within me. I don't remember some of them, and that's by choice. But this feeling burned like a cattle brand jabbed into my stomach, and the brand twisted when Dr. Copper came in and I saw the look on his face. Dr. Copper didn't have to say a word. You are listening to the final part of Perfect Forgetfulness, written by David Halen. Enjoy. Raisa and I spent the next few weeks mourning for the children we could never have. At the same time we were mourning, the world was getting more angry with itself. International news was talking about how an Iraqi brigade was making its way through Europe and how us, the residents, needed to know the whereabouts of our bomb shelters or MBD facilities. The MBD facilities were naturally more fortified because of the potential danger the terminals imposed if fractured, all in case the brigade came to where we lived. The local news was advising everyone to stay in their homes, but then they gave a list of public places that were open because they were close enough to a bomb shelter. We had a bomb shelter underneath our house that we've never had to use, but it was built with the house a few years ago when it was built. This is the most interesting thing on local news in months, and what dirt poor timing it had chosen. Now, on top of mourning and sulking for Raisa's infertility, we also have to keep an ear out for bomb sirens. What a terrible way to live, living in sadness and fear. Raisa and I looked out the window of our house after work. We had a sunroom next to our bedroom that had a view of the city. Breathtaking Paris. I think I had a dream about Raisa and I having sex out here by the lights of the city. Strange dream. Even at night, there's a little privacy here. I let out a heavy, graveling sigh. "I love you, my sweet, beautiful rose," I said as I met my wife's eyes. A smile grew faintly on Raisa's face, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I love you too, Gace. I love you so much. I put my arm over her shoulders as we sat next to each other on our little love seats in our sunroom, and I put my other hand on her stomach. I held Raisa closer like I was hugging her. Raisa weaved her fingers with my fingers of the hand that was on her stomach, and she put her other hand on top of our hands. Raisa rested her head in the crook of my neck and shoulder as we looked out into the city. The Eiffel Tower wasn't in view. The tower was too far to the west, or to our right, and a few kilometers away. There were clouds dotted around the sky like if you were to throw a basket of cotton balls into the sky blue floor. Weaving around the clouds were small European Union aircraft designed to guard against and attack against any oncoming threats. They were called the Condor ships. The Condor ships were a blue-silver color. They were a large wing with no tail, and in the center of each halves of the wings were two large masses that held the engines and the turrets of the Condor ships. We have never seen these ships in action, but there's this feeling within me that almost makes me wish to see them do something. I was getting hungry, and I think Raisa was feeling the same way. One of two kinds of empty we were feeling at the moment, but one emptiness is easier to pass than the other. I turned my head to get a starting view of Raisa's eyes, and she closed the distance in meeting mine. "Do we want to have dinner soon?" I asked her. Raisa nodded. "Do we want to eat here or go out to eat?" We looked at each other with longing eyes. It felt like there was a hole within us that only a child could fill, and without the security of the reality we wished for. Is safety in the familiar with mourning better than uncertainty in the pleasure of distraction? Recently, Raisa and I have been leaning towards the latter. I nodded at Raisa. "We could go out again," I told Raisa. "There's that one grill place that's close to the MBD facility." Raisa nodded. "I'm good going out in what we're already wearing." We were both still in our work clothes. Green polo shirts with a small emblem of the museum on the left side of our chest, and we're also wearing khakis. "Sounds good to me," I told Raisa. We separated from each other and got up to go to the front door to put our shoes on and go out to our car. Then we left for dinner. Almost as if the pavement below us was eavesdropping, Raisa and I were reluctant to talk about anything as we drove to the restaurant. I looked at Raisa as she was driving. It hurt to see her beautiful face so sad. The same thoughts looped in my mind. There has to be a way for us to have a life of joy despite this. But all the idea did was go around and round in circles with no variation. The idea of going through the MBD process again was out of the question. There wasn't a time in our marriage where we didn't want a child. The reality of Raisa's infertility hurt even more because of the scarcity of children in this day and age. It would have been a treasure to the world to bring forth a child, but reality has revoked us from such a wonderful privilege. A child was what kept us going, because we knew that when we were ready for it, we would have been good parents. We've heard stories about people adopting over 30 years ago. I think Raisa even said that she was adopted. But the few children that there are out there in the world already have homes. It's a good thing that children have homes, but we want a child of our own. Even if there was a child to adopt, there would be a sense of wonder and joy, but it wouldn't go blood deep. There is a concubine society of sorts that was created consensually for families where one of the parents to be was infertile. I greatly detest the idea because it wouldn't be Raisa and I's child. It would be some 16-year-old and I's child, and it doesn't feel a gram right. Raisa's eyes looked tired. Today was an easy day at work, which means she had more time to herself to think about, everything going on in our lives, whatever that may be that's on her mind. I think I might also look tired from thinking and dwelling on everything going on in life. I felt a burning scorch of empathy for Reza, because it affects both of us greatly. I looked from my wife to the front window of the car. In the air, the condors took formation for a sweeping motion over the city like hands on a clock if the clock's hands were going two different directions. There were at least 4 dozen condor aircraft in the sky, all separated by only a few hundred meters of sky between them. The condors flew in circles 3 or 4 more times over the course of 15 minutes before they broke formation. I looked back to the road. There was less people out on the streets today. I don't blame them for their fear. My trepidation was elsewhere. Is it a problem that I'm more afraid of my own thoughts than the threat of the brigade? It might be, but someone else can convince me otherwise if they're able to explain and I were able to listen. Reza took the last turn that would normally take us to the MBD facility, but she drove past the facility and took another turn a few streets down. On this part of the drive, there was a caravan of semis driving past us. I don't keep track of when the different stores receive their deliveries. I guess the stores get their deliveries today, and the impeding threat doesn't hinder the schedule. Reza pulled into a parking garage on the other side of the street of the restaurant. I gave Reza our card and paid for 3-hour parking, and the admission totem rejected the card, telling us that due to the threat of the brigade looming over the news, and the news looming over us. Reza turned into a parking spot that was on the bottom floor. There weren't too many cars here. The other cars were most likely people who worked in the surrounding businesses. I got out of the car and went over to the driver's side to open the door for Reza. Pow! The sound was loud. It rang through the streets outside and reverberated back and forth through the parking garage. Mists of dust and rubble fell from the ceiling above. My heart accelerated and pounded like the keys of an angry person on a typewriter. I turned around and ran back into the car in a panic. Wait, our car isn't sturdy. I could kick the side of the car and I would leave a dent. Pow! The sound was close to the parking garage, and my ears started ringing a small, irritating fraction as I ran back over to the driver door to get Reza out of the car. There was a crack forming above us in the ceiling of this floor in the parking garage, a few meters away from where we were parked. I looked around to see where the second explosion came from. It was close to the entrance we came from, and we were a quarter into the parking garage on this main floor. A white van pulled into the parking garage. Pow! Reza screamed and hugged my arm, and we were knocked off our feet by the shockwave. The van was shattered, and plumes of smoke and more cracks grew and spread on the ceiling above us. The ceiling wasn't going to make it. I was overcome by tremors. Reza's hands were visibly shaking, and she was in shock and awful surprise of everything happening. Guys? My wife's scared voice scarcely penetrated the echoes of the explosions. Pow! That explosion was farther away, and Reza gasped at the sound as we slowly stood up from the dusty ground. A deep, rumbling sound throbbed behind us overhead, and the sharp trickling noise of small rubble falling from above. The smaller rubble was the size of our fists and was dropping like rain. We ran. We ran as fast as we were able to. The ringing in my ears and blood surging through my body thrummed and rumbled over my senses. My vision was starting to wobble and warped as my blood and the vibration of another explosion. Reza and I held each other's hands in a tight hold. Where were we running? Anywhere away from the explosions, but the explosions were everywhere. Another bright explosion flared in front of us, lashing out another shockwave in every direction. As soon as that explosion happened, Raisa and I hugged each other so we wouldn't fall from the force of this new explosion. We were shoved to our knees from the power and force that the explosion released. There was a moment of nothing happening as Raisa and I held each other's whole bodies and broken hearts in each other's arms. We stood up again and started to run towards one of the exterior walls of the parking garage, each other's hand in tight grip. The ground rumbled. The rumbling wasn't constant. It hollowed and peaked as the dust caught up to us as we ran. We were meters away from the exterior wall of the parking garage as one quarter of the parking garage collapsed behind us. I helped Raisa over the concrete wall, and I quickly followed her over. I could feel the vibration in the air as another explosion tore a piece of the cityscape. When I touched the ground, Raisa and I seized each other's hand and ran away from the parking garage. I didn't look back. In the open street, the difference between Raisa and I's running paces was more evident than in the parking garage. My run was faster than hers, so I had to slow down little by little so I wasn't dragging her. In our desperate flee from the crumbling structure, we still had each other and our thoughts first. Adrenaline makes the older body more powerful. Raisa and I ran in a straight line away from everything. Explosions rattled the air, seizing and launching air currents in every direction. Our hearing was starting to return to normal. We reached a point where we thought we would be safe, and then everything turned from reality into a surreal gallery of events. Still images of a conscious understanding of the events of life. A shattered perspective. The hammer to the glass, it was the spray of gunshots, creating indiscriminate lines on the building faces. Raisa and I went to the ground as fast as we could for the fraction of cover it provided. Something slipped from my grasp and understanding. Something so tangible, but I couldn't see it, and I can't see it anymore. The absence of this special thing made my heart skip precious beats, and I felt a hot wave surge through my body. The cracks in the glass tempered and spread with painful agony as we laid there. Gunshots from numerous soldiers were a daunting percussive chorus, reverberating through the streets. The condors came down to the ground to fight against the attacking brigade. Countless sounds fighting for dominance as two vigorous opponents fought for the same thing. Our hands were still joined and softly folded together. In seconds, the conflict was over with 4 immense explosions that made towers of black plumes reach into the sky and the ground quake. Raisa didn't flinch. Everything was over so fast. The condors were in position, and the brigade was demolished, along with whatever was in the way. The sound of the city bleeding reverberated throughout the wounded commercial area Raisa and I were laying in. I was miraculously unscathed. I looked over at Raisa, and I found what slipped from my grasp as I still held her hand. The glass that was shattered scattered and fell to unreachable places when the painful clues fell together. Nothing mattered. The ground beneath us was obsolete. The air held no exigence. The blood rushing through my heart had no use. The tears falling down my face were worthless. I used my useless arms to try to hold the scattered pieces together. Maybe the glass won't make me bleed mournful feelings if they were all together. I knew that nothing lasts forever. All it takes is a hammer to break a glass foundation. I knew that nothing lasts forever, especially the things that never began. I knew that nothing lasts forever, but maybe we would expire at the same time. We knew that nothing lasts forever, especially not memories. We knew that nothing lasts forever, but maybe hopes and dreams were the exception. Raging sadness cut deep cascades of sorrow using my veins as guidelines. I was washed, but the wine used to clean me left stains in my clothes. The wine used to keep me alive was pounding my heart like one of those semis hitting me over and over again. My screaming throat released no noise to my ears. My sobbing chest made no tone. I felt no worth. I want my value back, but the glass is unrecoverable. Relief came and looked away when they saw her in my arms. Help looked in despair. Hope said an empty prayer as I was separated from my white rose. I sat there after they took her away. I sat there staring at a wall that was still standing. What do I do? How do I live without my rose? Guilt impaled me with a massive spire. We tried so hard. We tried so hard for us to be just right. We tried so hard. First, she couldn't have children in the first place. We tried so hard. Now there's no hope that she ever would. I found the smallest piece of strength that was spared in the attack. I stood up and called a cab. I told the car to take me to Porter's house. Damn this world. Damn this world. It was drawing close to 10 at night when I finally arrived to Porter's house, and Porter was sitting on the front porch with a lamp on next to him, and Brandon asleep next to Porter's chair. I paid the cab fee and got out of the cab. I started walking the distance from the dirt road to Porter's porch when Porter looked up at me with a downcast expression, as if he already knew what happened. Porter's eyes were also Race's eyes, and seeing his eyes so sad overtook me with emotion because I was reminded of Race's eyes when I saw his. I dropped to my knees and sobbed. I could hear every distressed heave rhythmically bursting out of my chest into my throat, and my tears soaked into my hands as they tried to catch the tears. I don't know how long I knelt there sobbing. I could feel it as much as you did, Porter said with a downcast tone that dragged his own voice down. I could hear him sigh. Race and I talked about it, but... There was a painful pause in his words. Nothing came out of my efforts. This, my voice shaken in sorrow, this is all my fault. I took my hands off my face, and Porter was sitting on the step of the porch now. Porter shook his head. The only thing that was your fault was the ambition you two had. Porter took some time to let those words hang in the air. And that was mutual between you two. My throat made an estranged sound before I spoke. What did she tell you? Porter let out another sigh as he looked up at the starry sky. Everything you know, he said before continuing, and a little more. Fuming anger started to foam through my mouth. What didn't I know? The downcast, pissed words came out like I was casting aside a dead animal. Porter stared at me a moment before speaking. Are you sure? I nodded. My tears were starting to dry, caking onto my face. Knowing how she talks about you, Porter started to explain, I don't think you'll like the answer. I sighed, and my words shook as I said them. The age of secrets died when Reza died. The words flowed out like molasses mixed with tar. Tell me. Okay, Porter said under his breath, followed by a swear. Reza told me that she was interested in getting a concubine. I could feel a glower darken over my eyes. But she knew you would never approve. Porter continued to explain with a defeated tone in his voice. Raisa dared wanted a concubine? So she told you nothing about it, Porter continued. I slowly shook my head. Porter began to say as he turned his eyes back to me. I met his gaze without wavering. Porter shook his head. I don't know your stance on all of this. I lowered my kneel to where I was sitting on my heels. I did talk to Raisa the most, after all. Porter's gaze was sinking. My gaze was sinking. It sounded to me, Porter explained, that keeping you content was more important than bringing another life into the world. My gaze rose to his. Brandon stirred in his sleep on the porch. You know more about you than I do, Porter told me as his gaze slowly rose to mine. Did Raisa succeed in keeping you content? I could feel a growl rumbling in my throat. I was livid at everything. Porter sighed. Come inside, Gase. Sleep in my guest bedroom, Porter invited, but he didn't say it like it was an obligation. He said it genuinely. In the morning, you can translate what you two wrote in the journal. Journal? Maybe that dream was real after all. I stood up and slowly walked to the front door of Porter's house. I went through the front door and Porter followed behind me. Brandon stirred awake and trotted inside and hopped onto Porter's recliner in the living room and dozed off right away. I went the rest of the way into the house and turned to enter the guest bedroom. Before I went inside, I looked over at Porter. Our eyes didn't meet. I'll make arrangements tonight for Raisa's body to be delivered here this week, Porter said as he walked by. There should still be some extra clothes of yours from the last few times you were here. Just throw the clothes that you have on now onto the chair in the corner, Porter said as he walked the rest of the way to his room. I changed clothes to something that was cleaner than my rubble and dust-covered work shirt. Then I crawled into bed and laid down to try to sleep. Amazingly, I didn't have to try too hard to sleep. Maybe it was the fatigue that I was grafted with today that made my sleep come sooner. After breakfast the next morning, Porter got the journal out for me to read. It appeared that he had already translated the journal. I was scared to read the journal. So many strange and awkward connotations came from the old thoughts of it. The first two entries. This was before the first time we went through the process. From Raisa. Gase and I have been married for 3 years, and we've gotten comfortable. But it isn't the good kind of comfortable. We are residing in the kind of comforts where we think it's okay not to talk about important things with each other. That we can deal with things so grandiose on our own and we'd still be together through the thick and thin of it all. No, that's not how marriage works. If it was, then anyone could marry anybody and live a married life. But that's all it would be. Just a married life. No joy, no happiness, no unity. I know that the reset won't let us keep our memories, but I wish it let us keep the lessons. November 19th, 2042. We neglected each other. We decided that our own problems were our own problems and could only be dealt with by those of us who knew the problems best, ourselves. I know I've thought often that since Raisa didn't know what's going on in my head, how could she help? And maybe Raisa thinks the same thing about me. The only thing that we did together was sleep. Sleep isn't the only thing we should be doing together. Over the past few years of our marriage, we had developed our relationship to that of classmates in school or a familiar face on our commute to work. all with additional privileges that come with marriage. The other thing that I've noticed on my part that may not have been on Race's mind, the thought of our children. Moreover, the fact that Raisa can't have any because of the deformation in her uterus. This came about because we had a thought that maybe intercourse would help rekindle whatever feelings were lost between us. I bet the mindset of me reading this can figure out the rest from there. The advice that I can give to myself from this: talk to Raisa. The fact that you talking to Raisa will let her know that you two can talk to each other about things going on in your thinking and your insecurities. No one needs to go through anything alone, especially those who are married. I shook my head at the first MBD entries. I felt intense regret for not reading these entries even once before. I continued reading. From Raisa. Gaze and I decided to expect perfection from each other. That lie lasted a few months as it quickly died with our marriage. I always wanted him to listen to me when I told him about my day being terrible because of my job. But I got mad at him when it didn't look like he was even listening a little bit. We would make big deals out of too many small meaningless things too. How the newspapers should be stacked in the recycling bin. How the living room should be arranged. Our evening routine, etc. We expected so much from each other, but all we got in return was regrets. March 6th, 2043. We overstressed each other about what was correct. Was this action correct? Was this arrangement correct? Was this idea correct? Everyone was wrong. None of us were correct, because we both disagreed lividly. And the fact that we both disagree made us both wrong, because we disagreed with opinions and not with facts. There were no facts this time around, only preferences and minute desires for micromanaging each other's lives. I want you to think like this. No. Why not? Because insert list here. Well, I think insert list here. There wasn't a day when we didn't try to wish for the best in what we saw. When in reality, we should have wished for the best in general. Such a stupid thing. A juvenile thing that tore us apart. So, if I do end up reading these again, I'll tell myself to just, both of you, don't work on each other, work with each other. I paused after reading the second MBD entries. This wasn't applicable this time around, but I should have taken my final message to heart a little bit more. I continued reading. From Raisa. This time around, we wanted to be closer than before. We wanted to not only enjoy each other, but to experience each other. We were happy for the first 5 nights in a row we had sex with each other. Then, at the end of the week, it started to become emotions that we would do before bed. Then the next week, we grew tired of it. But we believed in the lie that if we went out to have intercourse again, it would make us closer again. We were fools to think like this. Sex is an accessory, not a foundation. Sex is a gateway to family, not just a pastime. I can't believe how stupid we were to think this. March 24th, 2043. It's been only 2 weeks since Raisa and I went through the process, a shorter section of time than the attempt before. I think we placed the day we wanted to set our minds to on a bad day, not because we were miserable, but because we only had pleasure on our minds. I want to look back at the days following our wedding a few years ago and try to figure out what day is a better day for us to be set to. This time around was bad for us because for a week and a half we pursued a pleasure between each other, night after night. I believe we burned each other out. The only thing on our minds is the idea of what we can do in bed. And in the fallout of this, we learned that this is not what we needed to dwell on for now. We have broken gazes as we look at each other. We can look each other in the eyes, but we feel incomplete because we aren't completing each other the way we are needing to. I miss the time when Raisa and I loved each other. Him not out of routine, but out of devotion. And there's a myriad of reasons that I've learned from this. There's a myriad of lessons that I've learned from this that I know I'll forget through the process. First, love and lust are not the same thing. I lost the meaning of love the past few weeks, but I have full knowledge of this. Lust is never satisfied, and in the process of feeding lust, I have found myself dry and tired, looking for more venues to indulge myself. It's a useless pastime that takes more than it leaves behind. Raisa and I write short notes to each other that we put in our pockets before we go through the process. And the notes I'll put in each of ours will tell us that lust cannot take the place of love. Maybe I'll add that we should enjoy the company of each other more than the feeling of each other. I don't know if that means anything, but I feel like it would be a step towards keeping our marriage alive longer. Porter, if you ever read these, if you want to break your rule, if we go past a certain exception, if Raisa is talking to you about us only going after the pleasure of each other, stop us and give us the sense that we don't have. Thank you. That's an interesting entry. This one most closely resembles the warning I gave myself before going through the MBD process this third time. I had read everything. If Raisa and I had messed up so many times, and the only thing that kept us together was the thought of having children we couldn't have, why else did we try so hard to stay together? This last MBD process was perfect, if not for us being so invested with the thought of having children. The city will have Raisa's body here tomorrow for us to bury her, Porter told me as I closed the book and gave it to him. I nodded in understanding. What are you going to do afterwards? Porter asked as Brandon rubbed against his leg. I was snagged by deep thought. There's only one thing that I know to do. Porter didn't need any more explanation. Are you sure? He asked me as he rubbed Brandon's ears. I nodded. You don't know if you'll be safe as this last time or not, Porter pleaded passively. I know, I said quietly. Porter just stared at me as Brandon nudged his leg for more ear scratches. If it is that kind of last time, I'll take the consequences. Whatever degree they'll be, I explained. If I get no consequences, I'll take my second chance and live life with no memory of any of this. But I'll remember the dreams I've had about the lessons I've learned. Porter just stared at me as Brandon rolled onto his back for a belly rub. Porter sighed. So be it. The next day, a hearse arrived at Porter's property. Porter and I both knew what we had to do. There were 2 other men with a hearse to help us move the coffin to the hole we dug about 100 meters away from the house, and at the edge of the woods. On my corner, I was holding the coffin with one hand, and had my other hand at my side. I raised my other hand to rest on the side of the coffin. I'm sorry, I whispered so softly only I could hear. As I said those words, I felt a lone tear drop from my eye and hit the ground. We all carried the coffin to the hole and carefully lowered it down to rest inside. The morning sun was a gold color as it shone through the trees. The 4 of us stood over the still open grave as we bowed our heads in silence. My mind refused to have a single thought about anything as we stood in silence. As we were filling the hole with dirt, Porter got a rose bush and put it in the hole. When we were done filling the hole, before us was a black patch of dirt with a little rose bush in the middle with golden roses in synergy with the golden sunrise. Porter told me that the roses were red. I don't see that color. The two men that came with the hearse turned to leave. "Thank you." Porter and I spoke out of sync as we thanked the two men. One of the men nodded and the other spoke. "Just doing our job, sirs." Then they turned to walk the rest of the distance to the hearse. Porter and I stared at the scene before us, taking it all in. "One day," Porter said as he was holding Brandon's leash, "the rosebush will spread from where it is now." I looked over at Porter, and his focus was fixed on the rosebush. "It will be a massive bush with hundreds of roses the size of your fist." Porter looked down at his own fist, clenched with the end of the leash in hand. A beautiful sight. I took a deep breath. I didn't have the motivation to take in the full irony of what Porter said. The sun rose before we buried Reza, and the sun was starting to set as we turned and went to the house. I hailed a cab and waited on the porch for the cab to arrive. Porter stood behind me, and Brandon was at my side as I was rubbing his head. The cab pulled up as Blue Hour was starting. I stood up and took a few steps towards the cab and then stopped. I turned my body towards Peter, and Brandon was already sitting at his side. "What do you think?" I asked him. Porter looked up at the sky softly glowing above us, and said, "The little bits that I do think of you. I hope everything goes well for you." I nodded. "Thank you for being there." Porter looked away from the sky and looked at me. "Thank you for helping me bury my sister, Gase." I nodded. I took the final steps towards the cab and went inside. I looked out of the window of the cab, and Porter was sitting on the porch with his arm around Brandon. The cab drove me to the MBD facility. Time passed like the blur that was this life swirling around me. I stepped into the terminal, and it closed behind me. The automated voice spoke. "Please close your eyes." I closed my eyes. "The system has been informed that this is the 4th time you are going through the mind and body displacement process. Do you understand the risk you may be confronted with as you re-emerge? If yes, turn your head to the right." There was a second's hesitation, but I turned my head to the right. "Turn your head facing up to confirm. You understand any and all risks." I turned my head up. "Confirmed," the voice said. "Please envision the location you wish to be taken to. Once you have done this, turn your head to the right." A moment passed, and I turned my head to the right. "To confirm your decision, turn your head to face upwards." I turned my head upwards. "Confirmed. Now, please imagine the date of which we should reset your mindset to. Please think in terms of the date first, and then the moment," the voice instructed. "When decided, turn your head to the right." I thought about the time, then turned my head to the right. "To confirm time, turn your head upwards." I turned my head upwards. "Confirmed," the voice said. "The memory and body displacement process will now begin." The air swished and swirled around me in a familiar way that I seemed to remember from dreams, and everything was bright like sunlight. My surroundings were in view now amongst the blinding light. A forest at the edge of a small town, nowhere near where I came from to get here, wherever that place was. As the ridges of the tree bark became more fine and detailed, I keep on getting the feeling that I'm leaving so much behind, but I can't place where the feeling is coming from. Whatever I'm leaving behind, it must not be too important if I don't remember it. There was no sunrise or sunset when I was waiting for time to accelerate to the time of day I had myself set to. The weather was overcast and raining out when I was waiting, and it was still raining when I emerged. I was facing away from the forest and towards the small town. Just beyond the small town, it was a massive ravine with the smell of sea salt filling the air from dozens of meters below. I felt a note in my pocket. There was an address written on the note, followed by a short message that looked like my handwriting, but so different. The address was nearby here. I felt like I had just left there a moment ago. The message on the note read, "It's been 5 years. If I'm back here again, it means I failed. But at least she will be waiting for me no matter what. See address above." She will be waiting for me, but I just came from there. Wait, I feel old, like I'm 30, but I just turned 23. There was talk in the news about some NBC, MDD, I don't know, some acronym process that was dubbed fake time travel. Is that what this is? I turned the paper over in my hand and read the date on it. May 10th, 2044. Wow, I guess fake time travel is real. I returned to the address and knocked on the door. A girl's voice came from inside the small house. "One moment," she said with soft determination. "I'm slow." I could run around this house in 20 seconds, it was so small. I guess it was just the style that was so popular to a certain crowd in the 2020s. The doorknob rattled a little bit, and the deadbolt turned before the door opened to the inside, revealing a woman who had to be in her late 20s, sitting in a wheelchair. She looked more frail than what I remember of her, but she still had her marble blue eyes and straight black hair cut to shoulder length. She had a look of surprise, radiating a noticeable amount of joy over her, and she started to smile. "Gase," she exclaimed, "you're back." I smiled. "Hi, Amber." I could feel a smile of my own grow on my face. I gave Amber the note that was in my pocket, and she read it to herself. When she finished reading the note, she looked up at me with a glowing look in her wide, blue eyes. Amber was overcome with excitement. "Does this mean?" Excitement was bubbling up within her like a stunning, surging blue ocean. I nodded, still smiling. Yes. Thank you for listening to Perfect Forgetfulness. I hope you enjoyed. Now, enjoy the music.